Hey out there, you slot heads. You know what time it is. Today we're going to talk about tracks and how to start getting yours built. Hey everybody, I'm Mark. And this is another edition of Slot Journal. Like last time, I mentioned that we're going to start going through the process of designing and building a track. My next track, which is the third one I've had. And again, we want to take you step by step through that process. So this first video is kind of an introduction to the process. Some of the things I consider when I'm putting a track together in terms of design and use, and all those other factors you want to take in consideration. The one thing I do want to stress here, though, is, this is a set of guidelines, rules that I use. They just developed over time based on, things I like, preferences I have, and, understand that these things may not work for you. Some of the rules I have, you may like something totally different, or you may have different preferences, and that's fine. My hope is that maybe some of these things at least make you think a little bit before you make a final decision, rather than to rush headlong into that track building process, where it can be kind of costly if you go so far down the road and then you decide maybe that wasn't the best decision, or maybe this just doesn't fit with the vision I had. So again, these are just considerations. Take them for what they're worth. Like I've said before, use what works, and what doesn't work for you, that's fine. In the end, you got to do what you like. That's the whole thing about this hobby. Like any hobby, if you do something you don't like, you're not going to be doing it for very long. So with that, I'll start kind of going through some of the considerations I have that I look through when I start a track, and just kind of take a look at them and go from there. All right, let's start going through the list of things that you may want to think about before you start building a track. Consideration number one, is that track going to be permanent, or is it going to be temporary? One of the advantages of plastic track is that you can take it apart, store it for a while, or you can, make a different style or design of track anytime you want. You can take it apart, rebuild it, add more track. And for a lot of people, that's exactly how they like to enjoy the hobby. They don't necessarily want to maintain one track all the time. They like to change things up, and that's great. But in other cases, somebody, whether they're either have a wooden routed track or a plastic track, they find a layout that they really like, and that's the one they settle on. The advantages there are, if you're going to put in permanent scenery, you can do that. You can take a long-term approach, and that has its own advantages. The main thing here is, though, you got to find a design that you really like, and you're going to be certain that you like it. Because if you don't, and you get bored with it after a little while, you're back to square one. So main thing is, make sure you decide exactly how you're going to use that track. The next thing you'll want to think about is, how much space do you even have available for a track? If you're lucky, maybe you got a unused basement space, and you can pretty much do whatever you want with it. Or maybe you've had one of those kids, leave the nest, and suddenly their bedroom becomes available. Well, that's great. In other cases, you might have to move out into the garage, which presents some of its own problems, because, you have weather and heating and issues like that. But depending where you live, that's going to always be overcome. But again, you got to assess your space and try to figure out how much track you can fit into that space. Where you're going to store stuff, if other people are going to come and race, where are they going to stand, where are they going to watch. Those are all things you got to take a look at when you're assessing the space you have available. Now, you may start out playing with a track on the floor, but sooner or later, you're going to want to get that thing up off the floor and onto a table. So what are your choices there? Well, maybe you can set up on the dining room table. A lot of people do that for a while. Maybe they can get a ping pong table and use that. It's always a good start. But you may want to eventually break down and actually build a table for your track that's designed for your track specifically, to leave your plenty of space for the track and also for any scenery you might want. Now, table designs can be really simple or they can get really complex. They can just be basically a tabletop with legs, or they can be cabinets with storage underneath. There's a lot of different choices you have there. The other thing you have to think about is, that table, where you're going to put it and the size in terms of, reach distance. If you have a table that's really wide, maybe over 4 feet wide, or you're putting a table up against the wall, you got to think about, what's a reach distance that you can, go, whether you're marshaling cars or getting, other things set off around the track. Of course, you can always use a grabber, but beyond that, if you're setting up scenery, it's really hard if you're trying to set up scenery where a 6-foot table on the other side is up against the wall. That means you're going to have to get up on that table. And that's a whole other set of considerations, which means you're going to have to build it sturdy enough that as somebody your size, whatever that may be, can climb up on that table, get over to the other side to either install components of the table, get cars, or even install scenery. Another major consideration is what kind of racing are you going to be doing? If you have an analog 2-lane track, or it's different than if you have a 3-lane or even a 4-lane or a larger track. Or what if you're doing digital racing? You may have 2 lanes, but you're going to have maybe anywhere from 4 or 6 people maybe using those lanes in a digital setup. So you're going to take that into consideration, but also what kind of cars are you going to be racing? Are you into Formula One? Are you into endurance racing? Those cars and those tracks can be a little bit different than if you're doing, let's say, rally racing, where you may be using a single lane, return track, or NASCAR style racing where, you're racing on an oval. So again, that's going to play into the kind of space you have available. Some tracks lend themselves to high-speed racing. Other tracks don't. They're more twisty, turny, especially like mountain climbs and rally racing. So again, that's going to play a major role in what type of track you're going to build and how you utilize your space. When it comes to tracks, you also have some choices. A lot of us, or maybe even most of us, start out with plastic track, which has its own advantages. Like I mentioned before, you can take it apart, put it together, change up your layout, and that's really good for a lot of people. But as time goes on, you may want to try your hand at a routed track. It's not as difficult a process as you might think. And, there's a lot of advantages there because basically your design is almost unlimited. You can come up with about anything you think of, you can pretty much put it in a routed track. And there's a lot of resources out there available to help you build a routed track, whether it's specialized tools to help you get it routed correctly and all kinds of things like that. So again, figure out which way you want to go and then proceed accordingly. Another consideration is the power source you have for your track. Many of us may be perfectly happy to get along with that wall wart that came along with the track, and stock power sometimes is just fine. But you may find after a while that, that you're unsatisfied with the performance of that power. Often, the power isn't split between lanes, so what happens is if one car comes off the track, all that power goes into this other lane, and you may get a sudden burst of power, and it'll send the other car off the track as well. So independent power for each lane offers some significant advantages. Another advantage is variable power. And these sources can run from, anywhere from $15 for a variable power supply up to, $50 to $100 or more. You don't have to spend a lot of money, but a variable power supply lets you adjust that power, maybe from 14 or keep it at 12 volts. Or if the, kids come over and you want to make sure they don't have all the cars flying off the track, you can turn it down to maybe 9 volts or less, which will help keep things under control. So again, Separate power for each lanes and variable power offers a lot of advantages for you. Keep in mind, though, that power to drive the cars around the track isn't the only thing you'll have to worry about. What about your timing and control systems for your track? If you're running, maybe you have a computer set up and you have some lap timing software, whether you're doing that on a phone or using a PC or using a proprietary system, you got to have that set up. And then if you want monitors so everybody can see, race status and what's going on, you want to have that too. And the other consideration is, what about lighting? If you want lighting on the track, if you want to do a little bit of night racing, you can run a series of, LEDs around the track or buildings or whatever. You got to set up. Planning for that ahead of time really can be helpful. There's some considerations there that you want to take into account. But again, power to the track isn't the only thing you want to think about when you're planning wiring and all your other electrical components. One other topic to consider is using track design software to help you lay out your track. And maybe this is something I should have even talked about at the beginning, but there are a lot of software programs out there available that you can use to design your track on the screen ahead of time. And a lot of people find this really helpful. They can play around with, even hundreds of different designs, work things out. There are also a lot of designs people have already done, which you can take a look at, whether you're using that for inspiration or you're just going to pick up a design somebody else did that you really like. These are available, for Scalextric, Carrera, all the popular brands. I used an old one called Tracker 2000 for my track when I was laying out, only because it was probably one of the few that still had art and it's an old program, and it had art and track available that I could use to help design mine. Even if you do use track design software, there may come a time when you're going to get it set up and you can have to fiddle with it a little bit. You may get up there and get this set up on a table and realize that, there was something you didn't consider. Your space isn't quite what you thought it was, and you may have to make adjustments on the fly, in real life on the tabletop. There's a lot of people, too, who just prefer to start putting out pieces and just build the track organically, and that's great, too. It's not for everyone, and that takes some skill and some patience to make that work as well. But again, consider the fact that there are some of these programs available, and probably most of them are free or very low cost to help you design a track. Of course, once you get a basic idea of what kind of track you want, you develop that idea in your head. And I've seen this in almost every track. If you look at tracks, whether on Facebook, the pictures, or in the different, forums, almost everybody has a name for their track. They have some kind of identity, maybe branding for their track, and that's a great idea. That makes everything real individual. In my own case, this track, I call it the Schweizerring, and that's because, eliminated T, my last name is Schweizer, which means from Switzerland. So, we go back, many, many generations. That's, where our family would have originally come from. So that's the track setting that I have in my mind. That's what we want it to be. Now, in reality, after the great Le Mans crash in 1955, they actually outlawed auto racing in Switzerland. And I don't think it was maybe in the fairly recent past that they actually changed the laws to allow it. I know in recent years they've had some Formula E races. I know in some of the cities, I think I read about one in Bern. So my concept was, okay, we're bringing back auto racing. We're going to build a new track, and that's what the Schweizerring is going to be. Has a little bit of everything. There's a new section of track. Part of it goes up through an old medieval city. Part of it goes up into a high alpine section where there's almost a carousel, very similar, in feel to the one at Nürburgring. But again, all these things come together. You should have a sense or story. All tracks need a story. whether it's based on something real, if you're trying to recreate an actual track that existed, like Riverside as an example. I know a lot of people like to use that. Um, Again, have that story kind of working in your mind, so when you develop the track, the layout, all the scenic aspects of it, and how it works and flows, um, that that helps just keep things in your back of your mind, so things stay consistent throughout. And I find that's always been very helpful. A couple other things occurred to me here that I just want to mention briefly, just general thoughts, and you know, take a look at real racing circuits. That's always a helpful place. You can never go wrong starting there. Um, Regardless of what size table you have, you may want to resist the temptation to put as much track as you can possibly fit into a space. Think of things you see in real life, what real racetracks look like. Again, this is a personal preference of mine, but your results may vary. Maybe you want to get as much track as possible, and that's certainly fine. The thing about having a lot of track on a tabletop is, it'll affect your views of the driver. What you can see when you're driving, marshaling. It's going to affect, your ability to, reach cars when you're trying to, get them if they come off the track. So that's something you want to take a look at and be aware of, and think about carefully when you're laying out a track. There are things when you're doing scenery, look at landforms, trees, forests, hills, mountains, overpasses. Look at pictures and see what they look like in real life. How are tunnels laid out? When do road builders use them? Look at forests and hills and mountains. See what they actually look like. The other thing is details and colors. If you spread things out evenly over the whole table, sometimes it doesn't allow the eye to focus on anything in particular. That's your chance to be a good editor and leave some spaces open. It gives the eye a rest and makes your best areas really stand out. You need a little bit of contrast. If you look at some of the really great tracks out there that you've seen, a lot of them have some areas where there's maybe hardly any scenery at all. They're just not packed full of stuff. So again, it's fun to have a lot of color and a lot of things going on. And if that's your style, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You go, you be you. But, that's something to consider. Also, I would just tell people, just because you can find an item in 132 scale doesn't mean you have to use it on your track. If you found some farm equipment in that scale or some construction equipment, obviously there's military stuff available or industrial equipment. I know there's not a lot of stuff available on 132, and sometimes you'll come across something and you're looking for an excuse to use it on the track. And you certainly can do that. If you really want to, that's fine. But, think about real racetracks. Do you see stuff like that? And again, think about that when you decide to use those kind of things. Now, as far as the track I used, it's the only kind of track I've ever had, 132 scale Arden track. This track was available back, in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was very affordable. You could buy like a 4-lane set from JCPenney for a little over $100 with 4 cars. They had a couple other sets available that you could use. And it's actually a very good track. You'll see this. It's hard plastic. It's very similar to Carrera. It has some decent texture to it. It's actually very well made. Goes together very well. It clips together, so there's really no need for any kind of additional. Let me try this way. Really no need for additional clips or anything to hold the track together, because once it's together very firmly. But again, it's a good quality track. It's a shame that they don't make this anymore. I use it in my track a lot because it was so affordable, and there's still a fair amount out there. You got to buy it secondhand. Occasionally, I think the last set I bought was a new old stock set that somebody had. But again, it's well-made track. The rails, it's actually a steel. It's an alloy, So it doesn't have quite as much magnetic, grip as you might find with, like, for example, scale extract that are all steel. So, which might be beneficial for some people as well. The only thing I don't like about it, and you can see that here, is, the joints. It's kind of an unsightly joint system. When you look at Carreras, just have the straight seam across here, and these don't. So this is one reason why I have no problem, when I tape over these joints and basically smooth these joints. I use joint compound, cover them up to get rid of this, and then put a coat of paint on it. And the end of the track looks much better, and you get an effect that's, in the end, similar to what you would get with a wood routed track, which is obviously another way it can go. But this track. Originally, it came, the 2-lane set came with a 2-lane power. I took the power from a 4-lane set, which is a little more robust and it has more consistent power throughout. And I used that on the 2-lane. For the upcoming track, though, I'm going to have separate power for each lane. That's going to be a variable, adjustable power as well, so I can, make some changes there as well. But all in all, nice solid track system. It's one that I like to use. So there you have it. I hope this has been useful for you in some way or fashion. Again, just wanted to share some of the things I think about when I'm putting a track together. Hopefully there'll be a couple nuggets there that you can use. But again, once you get far enough along the process, you think you're ready, once you've got a track design, get some ideas down on paper, it's time to get to work. So on the next installment here, we'll kind of start on some of the things I did to kind of get that plan finalized. So for now, that's all. Have a great week and keep a firm handle on the trigger.